and we will get started. So good morning, everybody. Happy to see you all. So last week, we started talking about the Four Noble Truths. And last week, we discussed the first noble truth, which is that life is filled with dukkha. And we talked about dukkha meaning pain or suffering, and that it's just inevitable that we will all experience physical, emotional, and or spiritual pain during our lifetimes. So that's the first noble truth. Today we're going to talk about the second noble truth, and then next week the third, and the following week the fourth. So we'll cover all four of them as we lead up to Tisha B'Av, which is a holiday where we're celebrating or honoring or noting significant suffering in the life of our people. So the second noble truth is that suffering exists because of our attachment to cravings, aversion, or delusions. The Buddha basically said that the root of all suffering is attachment to the desire to have something, that's a craving, the attachment to the desire not to have something, that's the aversion, and the attachment to our ignorant views, and that would be our delusions. So we're going to really unpack this, and then we'll sit with it. Cravings is this notion of holding tightly to sensory pleasures or opinions or rituals. It's just really holding on tightly. So there's a significant difference between a desire and craving. We all, everybody on the planet, desires pleasurable states of mind. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's the being attached to that desire that becomes problematic. That attachment to the desire becomes a need, and that is an indication of craving. The desire isn't the problem. The attachment is the problem, and that's a really important but kind of very small difference. So it's the craving, that grasping, that sense of greediness. I want, or I want more. You know, this was really nice. I want more of that. Or this was really nice. Don't let it go away. That's the craving. And that's what creates the suffering. So in addition to having the obvious cravings for things that bring us pleasure, like a little bit more chocolate. It's a small craving, but it's a craving. Or, boy, it would be nice to have some chocolate, and that's the end of it. That's a desire. Difference. But in addition to those kinds of sense pleasure cravings, there's also the cravings of our ego. So the craving for recognition. So we can come up very easily with figures that are famous who crave adulation, who crave the spotlight. And that's obvious, right? But then we also have our smaller cravings for recognition. Like when I insist that my opinion is right. There's a craving there for recognition, a striving that kind of creates a little a little suffering. You know, when we talked last week, that suffering doesn't have to be the grand suffering. It can be little sufferings, little annoyances. So it's really important to notice when desires arise, are these desires tipping over into that area that it's becoming a craving? So that's craving. Aversion, that's the push away. So aversion is the fear of kind of being in contact with or getting close to that which we don't want or don't like. So that can be a person, a place, a thing. It can be an idea. So with aversion, we tend to resist or deny or avoid or oppose any unpleasant emotions or events or people that we don't like, that isn't bringing pleasure to our lives. And the really important thing to recognize here is that all people all over want life to be pleasant and easy and comfortable and satisfying. There's nothing wrong with wanting that. It's the how we go about satisfying those needs that becomes problematic. It's how we go about thinking about those desires that can become problematic or not. So that's aversion. The ignorant views is really all about our delusions. And this is an inability that most of us have some of the time, fortunately not most of the time, to really be honest with ourselves and to be really realistic. So we have fantasies about who we are and what we can accomplish and what we do and how we're perceived. Those are our delusions. Some people have delusions about science, as an example. That's a delusion. And that can create a problem, right? And suffering. So these are the causes of suffering. Stuff happens, and it's how we respond to that stuff, either physically or mentally or emotionally, that really is the cause of the suffering. So with this explanation, as best as I could do right now, let's sit. And as we settle into our relaxed yet alert posture for our meditation time today, I'm going to encourage you to think about sense pleasures, the things that you desire. Maybe you'll think about some foods that you love, some tastes that you really enjoy, or places that you really like to be, or any other really pleasurable sensations. Whatever comes to mind. I really encourage you to allow yourself to notice the experiences that bring you pleasure and satisfaction and gratification. As different experiences come to mind, you may notice different levels of intensity of pleasure. This simple noticing is really, really important. Noticing wanting or longing or maybe craving. The intention now is to really heighten your awareness of your sense pleasures and of your desires. You're absolutely entitled to the desires. And the noticing without judgment is really, really important. This is the first step in being able to discern whether these desires are causing suffering or not. As a brief reminder for those of you who were here last week, when we talked about suffering or dukkha, we talked about it as being on a continuum from a mild annoyance all the way to the other extreme of really deep, deep pain and suffering. So as we get in touch with our own desires, we may notice the pleasure it brings when we have it, and maybe some disappointment when whatever it is no longer present. We can consider that suffering. That happens from that attachment to continuing to have that which is pleasurable, kind of not living with the impermanence of all things. As we slowly and gently come back to the room, going to share a poem that I have shared before, but it just seems so perfect for today. Wanting, not wanting. I wish I didn't want things to be other than they are. But wanting to be someone who doesn't want things to be other than they are is just another way of wanting things to be other than they are. And I don't want that. So on that cheery note, I invite anyone who is interested